Welcome back. I'm Jonathan Hill, and this is our little theology channel run out of the parish of St. Seraphim of Seraph out of Boise, Idaho. And we're going to be continuing our discussion on the Dionysian Corpus. I've been gone for a while. Lent happened, and then Pascha happened, and then Pentecost happened. So please forgive me. I have been definitely off the wagon, so to speak, on making these videos, but we're going to be continuing on the Dionysian Corpus, and we're still working through mystical theology. We moved on to chapter 3. If you want to look at chapters 1, or rather chapter 1 is separated into 3 sections, those 3 videos are found either on my YouTube page or on the parish's YouTube page. So again, when we read a text, we're going to read the whole paragraph, and then we'll go back and discuss what's going on. So 2. How it is necessary to be united with and render praise to him who is the cause of all and above all. Unto this darkness which is beyond light, and we pray that we may come and may attain unto vision through the loss of sight and knowledge, and that in ceasing thus to see or to know, we may learn to know that which is beyond all perception and understanding. For this emptying of our faculties is true sight and knowledge, and that we may offer him that transcends all things the praises of the transcendental hymnody, which we shall do by denying or removing all things that are, like as men who, carving a statue out of marble, remove all the impediments that hinder the clear perception of the latent image, and by this mere removal display the hidden statue itself in its hidden beauty. Now we must wholly distinguish this negative method from that of positive statements. For when we were making positive statements, we began with the most universal statements, and then through intermediary terms, we came at last to particular titles. And now, ascending upwards from particular to universal conceptions, we strip off all qualities in order that we may attain a naked knowledge of that unknowing, which in all existent things is enwrapped by all objects of knowledge, and that we may begin to see the superessential darkness, which is hidden by all the light that is in existing things. Good. Let's go back. So we're going to look through this. There's a lot going on. It's a very, very rich paragraph. Unto this darkness, which is beyond light. Okay, so what is that? What's beyond light? How could darkness be beyond light? Isn't darkness an absence of light? Well, let's recall the 3 ways of which we discuss apophaticism. Yep. So negation, that is usually the only way people will discuss apophaticism, but there is also hyperabundance and laconicism. So here we have already a hyperabundance, right? A hyperabundance of light makes it dark. If you were to stare at the sun, you would see so much light that you would go blind. Good, this is going to come into play later, so remember that concept. Unto this darkness which is beyond light, we pray that we may come and may attain unto vision through the loss of sight and knowledge. Okay, so we are no longer going to be merely trying to see, right? Where knowledge, you could say sight could be sensible perception, knowledge is intelligible perception, right? So through the loss, right? We are cutting those out. The loss of sight and knowledge, that of the world, of the material world around us. St. Maximus makes very similar statements about detachment and whatnot. That in ceasing thus to see or to know, we may learn to know that which is beyond all perception and understanding. So perception, again, sense perception and understanding is the intelligible faculty of our mind. So again, sensible content, intelligible content. For this emptying of our faculties is true sight and knowledge. Perfect. Perfect. Fantastic. That we may offer him that transcends all things the praises of the transcendent hymnody. We're going to come to this word in just 2 seconds. Which we shall do by denying or removing all things that are. Let me continue. This is actually important before I get back to transcendent. Like as men who, carving a statue out of marble, remove all impediments that hinder the clear perception of the latent image, and by this mere removal display the hidden statue itself in its hidden beauty. Good. Good. I'll just continue. You probably noticed I have the Transcendentals written on the bottom. So we're going to talk about these mainly throughout this video. Now, as we must wholly distinguish this negative method from that of the positive statements. For when we were making positive statements, we began with the most universal. Think about the Porphyrian tree, right? The most universal. And then through intermediary terms, we come at last to the particular titles. We come to the individual. So what does that mean? So we can say that we have created things. Okay, that's the most universal, right? Created things. Then we have sensible. We have intelligible life, and we have non-sensible. Or rather, we could even just say you have inanimate life, and you have animate life and inanimate life, right? So you can think of like rocks and trees. Okay, so now we have created things, and we divided them further. We made them a little bit more specific. So we go into inanimate objects and animate objects. Okay, and then we can divide animate objects further. We can say animate objects that have mind, such as animals, or animate objects that don't, such as trees. Okay, and then we can further divide that and become more specific, and we can say, well, of these animals, we can say that this group is insects, and that group is mammals, or that group is lizards, right? And basically, you are seeing the Porphyrian tree, right? So as you get more and more specific, more and more down to articulate what the individual is, you'll go, okay, well, we have animal, then we have mammal, then we have human, right? And then we have the type of human you are, and who you are, and whatnot. So as the cataphatic statements we make are making things more and more specific. Does that make sense? So we start at the most general, created, right? And then from that most general, because everything is created, right? Everything that is created, right? We could say everything is everything. Now, obviously, we don't mean monism, but when we say that, we mean everything that is, right? All the created things. So all of them equal, right? So every created thing is equal qua created as every other created thing, right? We're equally created. You're equally being, right? And then you become more and more and more specific as you go down and make it more and more and more cataphatic, right? Because if you just say created thing, well, you don't know if it's a tree, a rock, a water, a human, whatever. So the more and more cataphatic you get, the more and more specific. I think that's pretty straightforward. Let's continue. But now, ascending upwards from particular to universal conceptions, we strip off all qualities in order that we may attain a naked knowledge of that unknowing. Great. So I think many of you have heard me say that God has no attributes. So this would be this is where, this is one of the first places we see. We strip off all qualities, all of them. All of them are gone. They're all gone. And we are moving from particular to universal. So what is that? Right? So that's not merely, we are going to start with Jonathan Hill, who is an individual man, and then talk about human nature, and then talk about mammals, and then talk about animals, and then talk about created things, etc. That's not really what we're talking about. What we're talking about are the Transcendentals. Okay, so the Transcendentals. This is another rather kind of unfortunately confused area in discussion in the modern age. A lot of people will say that anything that is a purely intelligible content is a so-called transcendental. So you might hear things like, oh, math is transcendental, or logic is transcendental. This is not really what is actually transcendental. That's merely just some kind of intellectual understanding or knowledge, right? Some kind of intellectual knowledge. Now, why is it not a transcendental? Okay, so a transcendental has to be true of all things. Okay, so we cannot possibly say that logic is a transcendental because my dogs are not logical, nor are my trees logical, nor are rocks logical, right? So when we discuss the transcendentals, we are talking about things. When we say transcendental, we mean that it is actually true of all things. Okay, so what are they? So typically, Okay, ens unum verum bonum and pulchrum. Okay, the being, the one, the true, the good, and the beautiful. Now, three of these, or maybe even four, maybe even all five, are divine names. So we will come back to these. We'll come back to these when we go over the divine names. Okay. Now you might say, how is everything being? Well, everything exists. Right? Everything that exists is being. Right? Everything that is created is equal as a being as everything else. It's wholly being in itself. So I'm holy being. My table is holy being. My tree, the trees outside, and the grass, and the plants around my house, my dogs. Everything is equally being, right? So nothing is more being than another, right? Okay, good. You say, well, how is everything one? How is everything one? Well, because they're all equally being, right? So if you think about how unity, right? I might have discussed this before. Unity is always a principle that must be prior to multiplicity. Okay, so unity always occurs first. It is always prior to multiplicity. It is always maybe superior. I don't know if you want to use that language. But multiplicity cannot even exist on the same ontological level as unity. It always comes after. It must come after the unity, right? Because everything first exists. And so if it exists, then it is unified qua existence, right? So if someone were to say something is absolutely diverse, then it would not exist, right? Because if it was totally diverse, if it had absolute diversity in that kind of way, then it wouldn't exist, because by having existence, it would have unity and therefore not be absolutely diverse. I think you kind of get where I'm going with this. Everything is one in the sense that it is the nature that it is, right? So all humans are human. There's one human nature, right? We are all consubstantial. All trees are trees. All plant life is plant life. All dogs are dogs. And then you can break it down. You can say all Chihuahuas are Chihuahuas, all German Shepherds are German Shepherds, right? You can say all Germans are Germans, all Russians are Russians, etc., etc. This kind of thing. All daisies are daisies, blue jays are blue jays, etc. So at every level, you see that unity first, and then the multiplicity. Okay. Now, these next three, being true, being good, and being beautiful, are about things actually existing, right? So if we remember in Genesis 1, at the end of every day of creation, God says that it is good, right? So things are good in the sense that they exist, because existence is good. Now, we also have to remember that if we think about the definition of theophany, theophany is the raising up, the revelation of God. And so by things coming out of non-existence into existence, that is a revelation. So creation is a revelation of God, and revelations of God are good, and therefore creation is good, right? So on top of that, we know if we wanted to jump down, this isn't necessarily the point of the video, but it's well known that evil does not have its own ontological existence, that it is some twisting of the good. So evil is a twisting of good, right? Because in order for evil to exist, it has to attach itself to something that already exists, and everything that exists is good. So it's some kind of twisting of the good. For example, in the Divine Name, St. Dionysius goes over this, where he discusses, and we'll get into this in more detail much later, but just to touch on this a little bit now, he says the demons want to exist, and wanting to exist, wanting to live is good, right? So the demons, while they are twisted, and they are using their existence for evil purposes, it nonetheless is rooted in the good. Again, the same thing about true. What's interesting about being good and being beautiful is that goodness is the first divine name, and beauty is the third divine name. Now, what's the name in between good and beauty? It's light. Okay. So you have light, right? Which light is tend to be understood, if we understand light symbolically, as when we say someone's really bright, right? So they're really smart, right? So we can understand light as knowledge, right? And this is actually all throughout the Dionysian corpus. When we think of light, we can think of knowledge. We can think of revelation. We can think of coming to know something. So these are in between, right? And so we could say this is definitely getting way further down in the track. I think it's actually Nepper in Negating Negation talks about how if we want to symbolically understand, again, just symbolically, um, we can understand good or goodness as the Father, right? And we can understand beautiful as the Son, as the Logos, right? And then the Logos reveals the Father. That's the light, right? So the one after beauty in the list of divine names is love, and it's love is the thing that brings things back into beauty. So what's beautiful, right? So what does the Logos do? Well, the Logos brings things back into order. So when things are pertaining to their telos or telos, they are pertaining to their function, their existence, then they are beautiful. So what does this mean? If I take a wrench and the wrench is meant to turn, nuts and bolts and to untie them and to tighten them, then this is beautiful. It's doing what it is supposed to do. If I take that wrench and then hit someone with it, well, that now I'm taking the good, right? The thing that it was not meant to do that. I'm twisting it. I'm using it for an activity that it was not meant to do. And so now it is ugly. It is no longer beautiful, right? So when we understand the transcendentals as beauty, right? When we understand beauty as a transcendental, it is the culmination of all things attaining to their fullness, right? So in the eschaton, rocks will be the fullest, most beautiful rocks. They will be the most articulate, the highest perfect example of rock, right? Now, even though they're at a lower ontological level than, say, trees or dogs, they will nonetheless be the best rock that they can be, so to speak, right? Because they will be the most beautiful. So beauty is the thing. When we talk about beauty in this way, we're talking about the mode of which a thing is supposed to exist at and the thing that is supposed to be doing. So everything, and the reason why this is transcendental, is that everything is trying to achieve its end. Okay, so everything has a purpose, right? So with this pen, I'm supposed to write. With this cup, it is holding water or some kind of liquid or some kind of material for me to use or whatever. And so they're fulfilling their purpose. And so everything that is created has a purpose, and so it is trying to attain that purpose, and so it is beautiful, right? Does this make sense? Good. So the last thing I want to finish with, we're getting a little at time here, is this idea that we are stripping away all qualities. Now, if you follow me on Facebook, you might have seen me write something about how about 2 years ago I started talking about how God has no attributes, and that's definitely true. God has no attributes. But on top of that, when people say, oh, well, God's simple or God's one, yes, you can definitely say that, and that's much better than saying God's multiplicity, which is absolutely incorrect. But what we have to be able to do, and what we have to keep in the back of our mind, is that even oneness, even simplicity, these descriptions are too descriptive of what God is, right? So we have to strip away all qualities, all qualities. And this does not mean that we're going to, but by stripping them away, because we say God's not one, that means he's multiple. That's not what that means. Um, we understand cataphatic statements and apophatic statements as a hierarchy, okay? So just because you say God is not something does not mean you can suddenly say that he is the opposite of that thing, right? A really good example of this is God is infinite. Okay, so infinite is a hyperabundance of finitude. So it's apophatic, right? Because hyperabundance is an apophatic statement. But no one would say, well, God's infinite, therefore God is finite, right? God's not, and God, he is beyond infinite. If we were to say God is beyond infinite, that does not mean God is finite. Another great example is omnipresence, right? If you were to say that, well, God's beyond omnipresence because God's beyond the negations, then you would never say, well, to be beyond omnipresence means that he is in one location. That doesn't make any sense, because omnipresence, he is already in every possible location. So he's already in that location that you're saying he is. So being beyond omnipresence is not to say that he is somehow present in one spot, or being beyond infinity does not somehow mean he is suddenly finite, right? Or that God's finite, right? So to say that God is beyond apophatic, our apophatic statements is not to affirm cataphatic statements. Those are not. That's not what's going on. Rather, what's happening is we are making cataphatic statements about God. And then we are saying God is beyond those cataphatic statements, and we make apophatic ones. And then we say God is even beyond those apophatic statements into this unknowing, right? Into the stripping away of all sensible and intelligible content which we can conceive, right? All the sensible content which we can conceive, and all the mental content which we can conceive. He's beyond all of those things. So even when we make negative statements of God, he is beyond those negative statements. And those negative statements, being beyond those negative statements, does not suddenly mean he is positive, right? That's not what that means. So a lot going on here. Just remember what the actual transcendentals are. It's not math. It's not logic. Those are purely intelligible content. Those are things that you can think about in your head. They're definitely not true of all things, and so they're not transcendental. So a transcendental has to be true of all things. The transcendentals are, again, being, one, true, good, and beautiful. We're going to go over those a lot. Again, those are in the divine names. When I get to the divine names and we go through them, we'll be touching this again. So definitely, save this video and use it as a resource. And remember, God has no qualities. There are no attributes. He is utterly transcendent. So remember when we talk about attributes, it's the thing that we're attributing. It's about us attributing something to the object, right? It's not about the object itself. Good. I know there's a lot of information thrown at you. I hope it wasn't too chaotic. It's good to be back. I'm going to try to make videos semi-regularly, but there's a lot going on. So please pray for me. And at the same time, I want to let you know that I have dropped both the donation page for the parish in St. Seraphim of Sarof and the donation page for the monastery. I'm going to put those underneath the video. The parish in St. Seraphim, we bought a new roof a year or two ago. And we're doing okay, but donations are always very, very helpful for that. And then also for the monastery, they are trying to build a church. I think they've collected most of the money that they need for that. But again, donations are always very, very helpful. Both Father David and Father Maximus have been very positive of this content, which is coming out here. They have both helped me understand a lot of this material, and so I want to be able to pay them back in some way. So if you appreciate this content, please remember that the donations are underneath if you feel so like you want to do something. Thank you very much, and good night, and God bless.